that's me. I'm Lex. So, hi. So I'm going to focus on the practices for individual contributors to growth, and Chetan is going to focus more on the team and organizational lens a bit later. And I have all the slides, so you don't have to frantically take notes, and all the resource links are up on my website at this link, lexroman.com/resources. Pretty easy to remember. All right, so that's me. I'm Lex. I'm from LA. And I identify as a growth designer. And I find that identity really useful for companies to find me by understanding my skill set. So it's been quite a journey to get to that place where I call myself that. And as Chetan mentioned, and as you saw on LinkedIn, the title is not actually growth designer when you actually get a job, but it is a way that I frame my skill set that I find really useful right now. And right now I work at a company called the Black Tux in Santa Monica, and I focus there on growth, but I sit on the design team. And I've worked at companies that are pre-product. I worked for an agency here in San Francisco called Carbon 5. We did a lot of first product launches. I've worked with growth stage companies like Prosper. I'm going to talk a bit about them. And I've worked with large companies like Nissan and Toyota, helping them more on the innovation side. And I want to just share with you my journey to growth. This is me on the Enterprise at the Wax Museum. I started my career doing conversion design. I worked for a tiny agency in LA called Kluge, and we would have clients come in and they would want to hit a goal, signups, selling stuff, donations, and we would overhaul their website to drive them towards that goal. I thought that was really fun. And at the time I was reading Eric Ries's The Lean Startup. Who's read that? Please say everyone. Great. Okay. I loved this book, and I was just like, yes, let's go validate some business models. Here we go. And then I moved up here to the Bay Area, and I went and worked at large companies as a consultant doing innovation work, trying to help them validate new markets, new problem spaces. And I did some of that work with Toyota. And then I took that skill set over to Carbon 5, and I worked with growth stage companies where they already had a customer base, but they were trying to achieve that next level of growth. And I really loved that work because I was able to use that lean toolkit of talking to new customers and understanding opportunities that weren't clear, but I was also able to measure it. I had analytics, and I had a solid customer base I could work with. And it was at Carbon 5 that I first heard this term growth designer. And I remember when I heard it, there was a lunch talk, and my head just snapped around, and I was like, what? Growth design? That sounds like me. And then I Googled it, and then 0 results. So I started to just call myself this. I was like, I'm a growth designer. And it started to resonate with folks. And many of you probably have also found that as you call yourself that, people are kind of like, what? And then they're like, oh, that sounds useful. So wait, you're a designer and you try to make money for businesses? Yes, I need that. So now I'm at the Black Tux, and I'm really trying to evolve how I sit within an organization and think about things beyond the online experience, looking at our showrooms and our warehouse experience, unboxing, stuff like that. Before we get into practices, I'd like to talk about why I think you should care about growth design. And then we'll dive into all the tactics. So let's talk about why I think you should care. How often have you heard, what's the business value of design? What's the ROI of design? Tell me that this matters. Why does design matter? Who has the answer to that? The answer is growing businesses. And we see that folks still don't understand the value of design because they pay us less and they hire less designers for teams. And when you go into a team, you're fully reliant on their understanding of whether or not design is valuable. And you see startups hiring people that are brand new into the design field. They hire a CTO, a CMO, and they're like, we can just pay someone $50 an hour and doesn't really matter, right? Design's whatever. And you see design not coming together to serve businesses, to help them succeed. And specifically on growth teams, like I said, they just left us out entirely. They're like, doesn't matter. We don't need them. If you can own this value of design. If you instead say design is valuable, you add, and I can prove it, it's way more powerful. You start to have a lot more agency in the business decisions, in what you work on and where you work. It's really empowering. And the reason that we're here is because we're seeing this new breed of designer. We're seeing folks come out and say, I do care about data and I care about my impact. And so just to highlight a little bit of how I see the difference between a typical product designer and a growth designer. Product designers work across products, right? They're generalists and they have depth in certain areas. And they're thinking thoroughly about customer experience. Hopefully they're goal-oriented. They're still driving towards a business goal. But in general, I find they're not in the weeds on those business goals. And they're not looking at the nuances of how they're affecting them. And then on the growth design side, folks that are interested in growth are really getting into that data. They really want to work with it and understand that impact day to day, week to week, month to month. It's not just like, oh, 3 months ago, our CEO told me that conversion's down. They're like in there every day. And as Chaitanya mentioned, they're focused on that impact. So where the product designer is looking at that holistic experience, which is very valuable and important, the growth designer is looking for those opportunities to open up levers for growth. I just really want to highlight the data thing. I just find in particular, that's a skill set I see underdeveloped in the field of design. So let's go into those practices. I'm going to focus on 4 areas of practice, and you'll see that there's an area here missing, which is maybe design. And the reason is that I assume that as folks who are here at a design meetup, you know a lot about design. And the design skill set is still very important in growth design. It doesn't change all that much. Chaitanya is going to focus on that. She's going to talk more holistically about the design process. But I want to focus on the skills I think are underdeveloped in general product design that are really key for growth design. So let's talk about goals. Goal setting. Hopefully y'all work at companies that set goals. Sometimes they don't. Like if you've ever worked at a startup, you're like, guys, we should have goals. And they're like, oh yeah, right. Hopefully you work at a company that sets goals and have some kind of practice, some kind of quarterly cadence where you're setting goals. The main difference between a growth-focused team and a non-growth-focused team is the radical focus on one goal. It's really, driving outcomes is hard work. Driving output is a lot easier. So when you're trying to move signups, retention, revenue, referrals, you have to laser focus on that thing. And that's a big sort of call out just to know when you're sitting in these meetings, you're thinking about your quarterly goals. If your team is taking on 5 goals, you're not going to hit them. And I think Sean Ellis, our fave father of growth, he wrote a great book talking about how you orient your team around that. How do you focus on the high impact stuff? And I recognize that designers aren't always driving those goals, but it's important to just be aware and participate in that. Next, prioritization. So it's great that you have these high impact goals. You're like, yes, we're going to drive up revenue, rock on. And then you look at your backlog and you're just like, blah, 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 blah. We're going to fix this bug, design polish. I'm going to fix this thing. I have this other thing. Oh, look, other people are adding tickets to our backlog. Does that happen to you? Tickets just come into our, and I'm just like, who added this? Why does this person have permission in Jira? And it's like, that's also not going to cut it, right? So it's great that you have these high impact goals, but like, what is your list of work? That list of work needs to be impact, 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 right? If you're working on a bug, it better drive impact. And that focus on outcomes is just critical. And as you do planning, as you review the work that your team is picking up, as you think about what your day-to-day work is, just think about, is the thing I'm working on driving that goal? Because if not, you're going to make it to the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, and you're going to be like, wow, we didn't drive that at all. Oh, that's because we were working on all this other stuff. John Cutler at Amplitude, shout out to Amplitude, yeah, in the house, has a great podcast episode about this. And if you follow him on Twitter, he's always talking about this. And it seems so obvious. I've seen it over and over again at companies I work for. I'm sure y'all have seen this. It's like we had all these goals and weird we didn't hit them because we were working on other stuff. Second area of practice is deep investigation. And this will sound familiar to designers because it's really about that discovery phase. So I'm going to focus on things I think are unique to growth. Quant, data. Data is key, right? And I think designers have this really interesting lens on data that maybe other folks at your company don't have. And that is the customer lens. The ability to see human behavior in data. And so one of the opportunities that you have with killer tools like Amplitude, I'm going to try not to sell it too hard. I normally sell Amplitude way too hard, and I have a mixed panel thing in here just to offset how hard I sell Amplitude. But Amplitude has a great tool where you can go through and see between your two goals, between your benchmarks, what are people doing? Where are they leaving? And this is where designers can really put their work together with the data and uncover things, hypotheses, reasons why they think this might be happening. Oh, I wrote a blog post about this on the Amplitude blog. I always joke they should give me a track jacket because I seriously talk about them in every talk, but they're a great tool. And I wrote a blog for them about how to do this kind of quantitative research. Next, qual, customer development. Customer development, I think, is a really undervalued sort of area of skill for all designers. It is a skill from the Lean Startup Toolkit, originated by Steve Blank in his book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And it's the idea that you are working with your customers to understand their problems, their scenarios. You're building with them into their lives rather than forcing solutions onto them or waiting until you have that solution to validate it. So that's something that we did on the Toyota project, where we were working with Bay Area commuters, and rather than pitch our solution, we're focusing on their commute. We're out at the gas station where we can hold people hostage and be like, hey, how long did it take you to get to work today? And understand the scenarios they're working in, the things that they voice as pain points. And we're listening in there for our opportunity to solve for that. And I just find in general that a lot of designers bias towards solution testing, usability testing, and they really miss this opportunity to hear if your product fits into people's lives, right? So like a black tux, this is a sidebar, a black tux, we're always like, yeah, suits and tuxedos is like top of mind for people. It's not, right? They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about their wedding. Ash Moria breaks this all down in his book, Running Lean. This is still my favorite resource. I think this book's at least 10 years old, but I love it. It's the best. And then lastly, in your investigative tool set, competitive research. Also, I think highly undervalued. I think designers are generally probably doing competitive research that's more focused on features or UI. But I think there's a real opportunity for designers to be thinking about who is coming up behind you. Like, who are your competitors that are going to kill your company? Also an Amplitude exercise. Who's going to come out of left field and take you guys out, and why? What are customers saying about your competitors? Why are they saying that? What do they find valuable? Not only competitors, but influencers. Who in the market is doing something exceptional that your company should be paying attention to? Jamie Levy breaks this all down in her book, UX Strategy, and she has a great toolkit online with a whole spreadsheet. She walks you through all of it. It's really great. I really do have this all on my website, lexroman.com/resources. Tell Jamie I sent you. In our third area of practice, I want to talk about validation. I worked with a designer who would joke that MVP is a term PMs use to destroy people's designs. and it broke my heart, first of all, because he did not on any level understand what MVP is. But also, I think designers are missing out on this vocabulary to negotiate what is actually built. So let's say you come up with this whole vision for something. You're like, turns out this thing is completely broken. We're going to do it this other way. Rather than let someone else chop that up into phases, participate in that conversation. Identify what you think the riskiest part of that design is. Identify what you think you need to validate. Learn skills like feature fakes, obviously A/B testing, price testing. Read about this stuff and see what other people are doing. There's so many blog posts about what folks have learned. This is just 10 of the ways you can validate an idea. There's an infinite number of ways. I think, the best resource for this is like founders write a lot of blogs about how they validated things like Dropbox and Uber. It's really great. And I wrote this up in a blog post also on Old Brief. Once you've shipped something, follow through and reflect on why it worked or didn't work. What's going on? What did you learn? Where should you go next? Just take a moment as a team to think about that. It's really hard to do this in today's like Slack, email, like 10-minute drive with the PM, ship it. It's like, that's not gonna work, right? Like we need to go in and think, what have we learned? So this is us back at Toyota just thinking about what have we learned about commuting? Like taking a step back from our experiments, where are we with this? What do we understand? What do we need to know? My colleague from that project wrote a great article about this where he talks about sort of the evolution of experiments. Rather than seeing them as isolated things, see them as like sort of a path to learning. Our last and my favorite set of tools is data. Instrumentation is, I just think, a really empowering skill for designers to have. Instrumentation is the idea that you can track the behavior of your users. So it is the code that your team writes to decide what gets tracked about user behavior. I once had someone say to me, well, don't we just track everything? And it's like, not if you didn't tell someone to do that. This is one of our flows at Black Tux. And here I've listed what I want to track, and I've circled a couple things. And so you don't always have to go in and define all this work. Depending on how big your team is, other folks might do this. But I think knowing that this is a step that has to happen and participating in it in some way is valuable. Because if I don't know that started registration is this screen, if I think it's back here, I'm going to redesign the homepage instead of that first screen. And so I think just knowing exactly how this process happens at your company, who's in charge of it, and knowing what they called things so you can go back and look up the reports, I have found it incredibly empowering. Segment has a great sort of email course about this. It's called Segment Academy. I have it on my website. It's really great. I guess one of the co-founders made this. Is anyone from Segment here? No, they're great too. And then going back to the lens that design can take with data, looking at data through that lens of customer behavior and saying like, it's not as simple as conversion is up or down, but something is going on because there's humans on the other side of that. So we ran a test at the Black Tux that I thought was going to crush it. And as you can see, it did not crush it. It lost within 1 day, guys. That is like almost unheard of. It lost within 1 day. My boss and I were like, we're gonna jump off a cliff if this doesn't crush it. And then we were like, oh no. Yeah, and our engineers were pretty pissed because we spent like a month on this test. And so it was just like, what? But instead of just being like, well, guys, I guess it lost. Time to move on to the next ticket. We wanted to know what happened here. We were so sure about this. What happened? So we spent some time slicing the data in different ways. I went through and I looked at those user journeys because I can see event by event what happened to those folks. I could look at errors that they were hitting. I could look by device. I could see what else they did. They didn't do the thing I wanted them to do. What did they do instead? And I was able to find out that people didn't convert because they went and shopped more. So they weren't even ready, right? So my solution was totally off. But this is something that I think designers can really bring that empathy lens to and really make that data come alive and add so much more value, right? Because we learned so much more from doing this work than just from the conversion numbers. And just to not bias towards Amplitude, there's a great course on Skillshare with one of the mixed panel PMs. So this is my toolkit. There's plenty of other tools that you can use to do growth, but these are sort of the things that I use on a daily basis to do my work. My message to you is to empower yourself with these tools so that you can own the value of design, not just for yourself, for design as a field. But also remember, growth is a team sport and you need everyone to make companies successful. Chetan is going to pick this up and talk about how that works within organizations. There's all kinds of ways. But bringing this skill set to your team so that you as a team can have the best setup for success, it's invaluable. And I got to tell you, it'll get you a raise. If you're interested in this practice, I have a website up called growthdesigners.co. You can find jobs, events like this. You can join our Slack group here. Would love that. Here we are on Slack. And also, we're also on Facebook. So if you're still on there, then you... Just kidding. Sorry, Facebookers. Okay, there's a link again, and let me give it over to Jason.